Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going way back in time, exploring ancient Chinese architecture.
Awesome.
We've got this really interesting article from Magnificence magazine,
Okay.
issue 111, I think,
Yeah.
called Ancient Chinese Architecture and Its Hidden Meanings.
Catchy.
It's amazing. These structures are so much more than buildings. They're like, three-dimensional poems expressing Confucian, Buddhist, Taoist thought.
It really is remarkable how architecture can communicate like that, isn't it?
It is.
We often just think of buildings as, like functional spaces, but they can be so much more than that. They can be expressive, reflecting a culture's values, beliefs. It's fascinating.
So the article starts off talking about balance,
Right.
which makes sense,
Yeah.
right? Huge in Eastern philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fundamental. The idea that you have these opposing forces existing in harmony, like yin and yang. And you can see that visually in the architecture, the symmetry, the shapes, the color choices, even how the buildings are integrated into the landscape.
So it's not just about the visual balance.
Yeah.
It's about a deeper philosophical harmony.
Precisely. And the Forbidden City is a great example. Those iconic yellow glazed tiles.
Yeah.
They weren't just chosen because they look nice.
There's more to it than just looking nice.
Oh, yeah. Much more.
The article mentioned yellow, especially that specific bright shade. It was packed with meaning.
Absolutely. Now, to really grasp this, we need to talk about the five elements theory. It's a key concept in Chinese thought. Imagine a circle.
Okay.
Now, within that circle, you've got 5 points, each representing an element: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water.
Okay.
And they're not just static, there's a dynamic interplay between them.
So it's like a cycle.
Precisely. Fire produces earth. Think about ash from a fire. It enriches the soil. Earth, in turn, produces metal. We mine ores from the earth, and so on. This cycle, it governs everything: the seasons, human emotions, and even architecture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So where does yellow fit into all this?
So yellow represents Earth, which is seen as the foundation of everything in this system.
Okay.
And that rich golden yellow you see in the Forbidden City, that was the color of imperial power. It's not just Earth, it's the most potent, fertile, life-giving Earth imaginable. So when you see those tiles, you're not just seeing yellow, you're seeing a visual representation of the emperor's authority,
Right.
his connection to the cosmos. It's amazing.
It's like they built the emperor's power into the color scheme.
Exactly. And the 5 elements, they influence color choices all over Chinese architecture. For instance, you ever notice how many red doors and walls you see?
Oh, yeah. Actually, now that you mention it, red does seem to be a pretty popular choice.
Mm-hmm.
Is there some significance there?
Yeah, definitely. Remember that cycle we talked about? Well, fire, which is red, generates earth, which is yellow,
Right.
and earth generates life. So by incorporating red, the builders believed they were nourishing the inhabitants, promoting prosperity, ensuring the land itself thrived. It's like weaving good fortune into the walls.
I like that. It's like each color choice is like a little prayer, a wish for harmony and abundance.
That's a really nice way to put it. And it all ties into another key concept: the golden mean from Confucianism.
I've heard of that. Something about moderation.
It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between extremes,
Right.
avoiding excess. And you see that reflected in the architecture, too. The emphasis on symmetry, it's not just aesthetically pleasing, it embodies that Confucian ideal of balance and harmony.
Oh, interesting.
The Forbidden City's north-south axis is a great example. It reflects the order of the cosmos, the emperor's rightful place within it.
So they were literally building these philosophical ideas into the structures. Wow. It's amazing how it all comes together. Speaking of things coming together, the article talks about this belief that heaven is round and earth is square.
Ah, yes. Another fundamental concept that you see everywhere. You'll see buildings with square shapes representing the earth.
Okay.
And then these beautiful rounded roofs, often called flying eaves,
Right.
circular archways and windows, all symbolizing heaven.
Wow. So they were bringing those two realms, heaven and earth, together within the structure itself.
Precisely. And it wasn't just about looks. People believed that living in these buildings would promote well-being, a sense of connection to the universe.
Wow.
Yeah.
It makes you think, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
our surroundings have a real impact on how we feel.
Oh, absolutely.
What also caught my eye was that even roof styles changed depending on where you were in China.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's like, do they have different architectural dialects?
They did. It's fascinating, the regional variations. In northern China, like we see in the Forbidden City, you get that vibrant combo, red walls, yellow glazed tiles with accents of blue and green. It's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Striking.
But in southern China, they kind of went for a different feel, didn't they?
They did, yeah. More peaceful, white walls, black columns, and blue tiles, often used in gardens and temples, like they were responding to the landscape around them.
Yeah. And speaking of cultural influences, the article really talked about that idea of living in harmony with nature.
Oh, yeah. Crucial concept.
Yeah. They even quoted Mencius saying, heaven and earth flow together harmoniously.
That's a good one.
And from Zhuangzi, heaven, earth, and I come into being together. All things and I are one. Strong words.
Gets to the heart of it. They weren't about conquering nature. It was about coexisting, finding that balance. And that's reflected in how their buildings blend with the landscape, like the summer palace pavilions, the foundations, timber frames, the decorative roofs. It all works together to create that sense of flow, connecting the structure to its natural surroundings.
It's not just in nature. It feels like it's a part of nature.
Exactly. When you think about how important nature is to Confucian and Taoist thought, it makes sense that it would be so central to their architecture.
It makes me want to go see it all in person.
Oh, yeah.
And speaking of experiencing it firsthand, the article mentions something about courtyard houses.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like they were more than just homes.
They were like self-contained microcosms, reflecting those same principles of harmony and balance. Imagine a home centered around an open courtyard. It was like a private oasis, bringing light and air, nature, right into the heart of the dwelling.
So even their homes were designed with that cosmic connection in mind.
Absolutely. The layout, doors, windows, even the landscaping within the courtyard, all carefully considered to create a flow of energy, a sense of balance. It wasn't just shelter. It was about creating a space that nourished the spirit and the body.
It makes you look at our modern approach to architecture. Kind of makes it seem a little lacking, doesn't it?
Well, that's an interesting point. We prioritize functionality, efficiency in the modern world, sometimes at the expense of beauty, meaning that connection to nature.
Maybe there's something we can learn from these ancient principles. Tell me more about those courtyard houses, though. What were they like inside?
Typically, they were arranged around that central courtyard, main living spaces facing south for maximum sunlight. Rooms often interconnected, creating a flow, a continuity. And the materials they used, things like wood and tile, they were chosen for their symbolic meanings as much as for their practicality.
So even the choice of materials had meaning. Like, what did wood and tile represent?
Yeah. Wood, being natural, symbolized life, growth, warmth. And tile, fired in a kiln, represented stability, permanence, a connection to the element of earth.
So every detail had significance. Did they also incorporate those symbolic shapes and colors we talked about earlier?
Absolutely. You'd often find rounded doorways and windows, symbolizing heaven, within the square-shaped rooms, which, as we discussed, symbolized earth, always striving for that balance, even within the home. Color choices were influenced by the five elements, too, ensuring a harmonious flow of energy.
So even in their homes, they brought those big philosophical ideas to life. It's really making me appreciate the thought, the intention behind every aspect of their design.
And remember, it wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about creating a home that was conducive to a good life, in harmony with yourself, your family, and the natural world.
Makes you look at your own home a little differently, doesn't it? All those design choices we make, maybe they're saying more than we realize.
It's an interesting thought. Maybe we can take inspiration from the ancient Chinese and consider how we can create spaces that nourish our souls as well as our bodies.
Definitely some food for thought.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about palaces, temples, homes, but what about those incredible Chinese gardens?
Ah, yes.
I've always seen these pictures. They just seem to be in a category all their own.
Yeah, Chinese gardens are masterpieces in their own right, designed to be like miniature representations of the cosmos and full of symbolism, just like the architecture we've been discussing.
I've always found them so peaceful, visually stunning. But I'll be honest, I don't really understand what makes them so special.
Well, first off, they are meticulously designed to embody those principles of harmony, balance, interconnectedness we keep talking about. Think of them as like a three-dimensional poem where every element has meaning and purpose.
Makes sense, given how much symbolism we've already uncovered. But how do they create this miniature cosmos within a garden?
Every element, from the placement of rocks and water features to the types of plants and the layout of paths, was carefully considered. Like, they were trying to evoke those grand philosophical ideas.
The article used this beautiful phrase. It said that Chinese gardens aim for an aesthetic that appears made by humans, but designed by heaven.
Right.
What does that even mean?
It's about capturing that balance between human intention and the natural world. Like creating a space that feels both cultivated and wild.
Oh, wow.
Like nature had a hand in its creation.
So it's not about imposing order on nature, but working with it,
Exactly.
collaborating with it to create that harmonious whole.
And that's why they often incorporate elements of the surrounding landscape, like hills, rocks, water, to blur those lines between the garden and the natural environment.
Sounds a lot different from the formal gardens you see in Europe, with their perfectly manicured hedges and symmetrical layouts.
Right. The emphasis is on creating a sense of natural flow, movement. It's not about rigid lines. It's about evoking the energy of nature, meandering paths, unexpected vistas, a sense of mystery and discovery.
I can see how that would create a more contemplative experience. The article also talked about Chinese gardens representing harmony between heaven, earth, and humankind. How do they pull that off?
Well, remember that belief about heaven being round and earth being square? Same symbolism in garden design. Circular pathways might represent the celestial realm, while square-shaped pavilions would symbolize the earth.
And then you, the visitor, become that third element, the human presence, connecting with both heaven and earth.
Beautifully put. They're creating a space where all three realms coexist and interact harmoniously.
Were there any other specific elements or symbols they used?
Oh, tons. Water is key, often symbolizing the flow of life, time, energy. You'll see ponds, streams, waterfalls, carefully integrated.
I'm guessing those water features weren't just placed randomly.
Not at all. Strategically placed to create specific visual and auditory effects. The gentle sound of water trickling over rocks, that was thought to be incredibly soothing, conducive to contemplation.
It's like they were composing a symphony of nature,
Exactly.
using water, rocks, and plants as their instruments.
And those were carefully chosen for their symbolic meanings, too. Rocks, especially the ones weathered by time and the elements, they often represented mountains. You know how mountains are revered in Chinese culture for their strength, permanence?
Yeah.
So more than just decoration, they're like bringing that essence into the garden.
What about plants? Any symbolism there?
Plants are incredibly symbolic in Chinese culture. Each species carries its own set of meanings.
Huh?
Bamboo, for example, with its ability to bend without breaking, symbolizes resilience.
Okay.
Plum blossoms represent perseverance, hope, because they're one of the first flowers to bloom, even in winter.
It's like a whole language of symbols. They're using plants to tell stories.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes these gardens so fascinating. Always new layers of meaning to discover.
Makes you realize how much we miss when we just look at things superficially. I'm seeing the world with new eyes after this deep dive. Speaking of new eyes, the article brought up the Summer Palace as a prime example of blending with the landscape. Can you tell me more?
The Summer Palace is spectacular. Sprawling imperial garden complex outside Beijing. Over 700 acres, you've got this vast lake, Longevity Hill, and a bunch of temples, pavilions, bridges, gardens, all working together to create this harmonious whole.
Sounds like you could get lost in there for days.
You could.
What should I look out for if I ever visit?
Notice how the buildings are positioned. They're often placed to take advantage of the views, enhance the natural beauty. The pavilions, they might be built on raised platforms or nestled into the hillside, like they're emerging organically from the landscape.
And those incredible roofs we talked about, they probably come into play too, right?
Oh, definitely. Those sweeping curves, those upturned eaves, they mimic the shapes of the hills, creating this visual continuity, this harmony.
It's amazing how they blended those human-made structures with the natural world so seamlessly. I get why it's considered a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Are there any other notable examples of ancient Chinese architecture we should mention?
Oh, so many. We touched on the Forbidden City, but the Temple of Heaven, also in Beijing, and the Potala Palace in Tibet are incredible.
I've seen pictures. They are breathtaking. What makes them stand out?
Well, the Forbidden City is a testament to imperial power. Vast courtyards, imposing gates, intricate decorations, and remember, laid out on that north-south axis, reflecting those Confucian principles.
The city itself embodies those ideas.
Yeah. And the Temple of Heaven, that's a more spiritual complex dedicated to the worship of heaven. It's known for its circular building symbolizing heaven, set within a square enclosure representing Earth.
That harmony again.
Exactly. And then you have the Potala Palace. It's perched high on a hilltop in Lhasa, Tibet. An extraordinary example of Tibetan architecture, with its white walls, sloping roofs, and golden decorations. It's served as the winter residence of the Dalai Lamas for centuries.
Wow. Each one seems to embody a different aspect of Chinese culture and history. It just makes you realize how much diversity and depth there is to ancient Chinese architecture. I'm definitely adding these to my travel bucket list. But before we get too carried away with travel plans, I want to go back to that idea of ancient Chinese architecture promoting harmony between people and nature. We saw how that played out in gardens, but how did they achieve this in their buildings?
Well, the use of courtyards is a good example. Not just in palaces, but in homes, too. They weren't just empty spaces. They were meant to invite nature right into the heart of the dwelling. Light, air, that connection to the natural world. It's about creating a sense of integration, blurring those lines.
I can see how that constant reminder of nature, even inside your home, would be beneficial.
It is. And the summer palace pavilions are a great example of that. The way the foundations, the timber frames, those roofs all work together, it's remarkable.
It's like the buildings themselves become part of the landscape.
Exactly. And that's a really important point. Ancient Chinese architects didn't see their creations as separate from nature. They viewed them as extensions of nature, designed to complement and enhance its beauty.
That's a perspective we could all learn from, I think, especially now, facing so many environmental challenges.
I agree. Maybe there are lessons we can learn about how to create a more harmonious and sustainable relationship with nature from these ancient principles.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. I feel like I'm seeing architecture and the world around me in a whole new light.
That's great to hear. Sometimes all it takes is a shift in perspective to open up a whole new world of understanding.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So we've covered a lot today, from the symbolism of colors and shapes to the philosophical ideas that shaped ancient Chinese architecture. What are some of the key takeaways you hope listeners will walk away with?
I hope they've gained a deeper appreciation for the complexity of ancient Chinese architecture. It wasn't just about creating beautiful buildings or functional buildings. It was about creating spaces that reflected this deep understanding of the universe and our place within it.
And it wasn't just about grand palaces and temples. It was everything. Homes, gardens, city planning, a holistic approach to design that tried to create harmony and balance in all aspects of life.
And remember, these weren't just abstract ideas. They were embodied in those physical forms and materials. The ancient Chinese were masters at translating their philosophical concepts into something tangible, using architecture as a language to communicate those beliefs and values.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the power of architecture to express something deeper. Yeah, it really makes you think about the spaces we live in today, what they say about us. We're so focused on, is it functional? Is it efficient? But do our buildings nourish our souls the way these ancient Chinese structures did?
That's a really good question. Maybe by understanding those ancient designs, we can learn something about creating spaces that are more than just practical.
Right.
Spaces that inspire us, uplift us, connect us to nature.
The article really emphasized how these structures weren't just about looks, they were expressions of a whole way of thinking.
Absolutely. Designed to reflect that harmony, that balance they saw as so important to living a good life. And it's amazing how they took those ideas and made them real, in the forms of the buildings.
I'm still thinking about those courtyard houses, that idea of them being like little mini universes.
Yeah.
Bringing the family and the cosmos together. It's fascinating. Makes me wonder if, our modern homes are really serving us as well as they could.
It's definitely a different approach. We tend to focus on privacy in the West, separate spaces. But those courtyard houses, they were all about connection to family, nature, even the heavens.
Maybe we can learn something from that, even if we're not all building courtyard houses.
I think so. Even little things like bringing more plants into our homes.
Yeah.
Creating a little meditation space, or just thinking about how our furniture is arranged to create a sense of flow, harmony.
I feel like this whole deep dive has really changed how I see architecture.
That's great.
I'm going to be looking at all the buildings around me differently now.
That's the beauty of learning, isn't it? It opens your eyes to the world in new ways.
Yeah.
You start noticing things you never saw before.
Right.
And those everyday things become extraordinary.
Imagine walking into one of those ancient Chinese buildings now with everything we've talked about in mind.
Yeah.
It wouldn't just be, seeing it. It would be understanding it, feeling it,
Exactly.
connecting to something bigger.
You wouldn't just see the shapes, you'd understand the stories they tell, the beliefs they represent.
Like reading a poem written in brick and stone.
That's a great way to put it. And it wouldn't just be those ancient buildings. You could apply this to architecture everywhere, even in our own cities. Start noticing those details. Why did they design it that way? What do those choices say about us, about our values?
It's like we've been given this new lens to see the world through.
And that's one of the best things about knowledge, the ability to see familiar things in a new way, appreciate the beauty and meaning that's often right there in front of us.
This has been amazing, honestly. I've learned so much, not just about the architecture, but about history, philosophy, the power of human creativity.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Yeah, likewise.
And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, inspired you to look at the world around you with fresh eyes. Who knows what you might discover?
That's a great thought to leave everyone with. So until next time, keep exploring, keep those questions coming, and most importantly, keep your minds open.